It's the Year of the Dragon, folks. And what better time to celebrate this momentous occasion by reviewing an anime and manga franchise that started it all for me. And this isn't going to be just one review, but an entire year's worth of material related to the franchise. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Year of the Dragon Ball. And to start things off, let's take a look at the anime and manga that started it all, a little anime simply known as Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball is an anime adaptation of the legendary manga series of the same name written by Akira Toriyama for Shueisha's weekly Shonen Jump magazine. The anime covers the first 194 chapters of the manga and was animated by Toei Animation. The series is a very loose parody of the Chinese story Journey to the West, as well as various other kung fu action films by Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee. The series involves a young monkey-tailed boy named Goku who lives deep in the forest befriending a teenage girl named Bulma. The two go on a fantastic journey to recover the 7 mystical Dragon Balls, which when brought together summons the eternal dragon Shenron, who grants whoever summons him any wish. Yeah, this is an anime that is so well known, it really doesn't need any introduction, so let's just jump right into it. The story starts as our hero Goku is found training his martial arts skills in the forest. He does this by indirectly upsetting a saber-toothed cat and uses his skills to outsmart it. Okay, are you sure we're not mistaking this as a Roadrunner cartoon? One thing you may notice is that Goku has a tail. Originally, Goku was based off of the Monkey King Sun Wukong from the Chinese novel Journey to the West, as attested by his monkey tail, staff, and name. In the novel, he decides to travel around the world to seek the power of Tao and find a way to be able to live forever. This ambition for immortality is shared by many characters in the anime as why they pursue the Dragon Balls. Although the manga and the anime shake off their connection with the Chinese novel pretty quickly. Anyway, Goku uses his tail to catch a giant fish and... Okay, thank you. We really didn't want to see that. Yeah, I know cultural differences and times have changed, sure, but I still don't want Chris Hansen and guys in black suits knocking at my door. But before he can enjoy his new catch, a strange visitor from the city approaches. Goku, having lived in the mountains away from civilization, attacks the visitor's vehicle, confusing it for a monster, and he throws it. She responds by emptying a clip at him. Yeah, I really love how he could simply shrug off being shot with bullets as a kid. But when it comes to having the powers of a freaking god...
How embarrassing! How embarrassing!
The girl named Bulma ends up being interrogated over her sudden appearance, and after a bit of banter, she decides to follow Goku home, seeing that he has one of the Dragon Balls.
My name? Mine?
Uh-huh.
Bulma?
That's funny.
Hey, Goku's not exactly normal, so there.
Yeah, but it's not as weird as yours.
Yeah, this is kind of lost in translation, but the reason why Goku thinks that her name is so funny is because Bulma is the Japanese pronunciation of bloomers in English, which is a type of women's underwear found more commonly during the Victorian era. Goku goes to take Bulma to see his grandfather, who turns out to be the 4-star Dragon Ball, as it is the only memento that Goku has to remember his grandfather by. She shows him the other Dragon Balls she has on her, and tells him that they are a part of 7 that when brought together summons the eternal dragon Shenron, where she plans to wish for the perfect man. Oh, honey, wait a few more years. You'll eventually come across the perfect man. Sure, he's constantly grumpy, complains all the time, and is extremely antisocial, but hey, at least he's devoted. Shenron doesn't take refunds. We also meet the show's villain, a leader of a gang of bandits named Emperor Pilaf. He pretty much amounts to that of a joke villain who is easily outsmarted and defeated. He may have the ambition for a dictator aiming for global domination, hence the self-appointed title of Emperor, but he's not really much of a threat here. Yeah, quite the opposite when compared to the Saiyans, Frieza, Cell, and Majin Buu. Of course, Bulma also wants Goku's 4-star Dragon Ball, so she tries various methods to get him to give it to her, as Bulma Briefs lives up to the family name by showing hers. She then tricks him to go on an adventure with her to search for the other Dragon Balls. As you can probably tell, even in Dragon Ball Z, Bulma tends to rush into things blindly. Here, for instance, she sneaks off to go pee despite Goku's warnings not to wander off, only to end up in the clutches of a dinosaur. I thought Beerus said that he wiped out the dinosaurs, so what's this? And what's this, for that matter? Either Beerus really sucks at his job, or he's just simply too lazy to make sure that he follows through. Unfortunately, Goku's poor sense of awareness is prevalent even this far back, as the dinosaur plays him for a sap, ties him to a tree, and takes off with Bulma. Goku escapes and pulls an incredibly impossible airborne stunt to beat down the dinosaur and save her, but she ends up wetting her herself. Goku and Bulma then continue their quest to find the other Dragon Balls as they speed off into the sunset, and thus an incredible adventure has just begun. Well, that was certainly interesting. Now let's go over why this anime is so iconic. The story of Dragon Ball in the United States is a long yet fascinating one. After the original Dragon Ball first came out in Japan in 1986, there were 2 attempts to bring it to the United States, both of which failed. The first attempt was in 1989 by Harmony Gold, the same company that dubbed Robotech. It was test marketed in several cities, but was never broadcast to the general public, and it was canceled with only 4 episodes finished. The second and more well-known attempt was by the newly formed Funimation Entertainment alongside Saban in 1995, with only the first 13 episodes dubbed and airing in first-run syndication alongside Dragon Ball Z. The problem was that they both ran at super early time slots. Dragon Ball Z in particular originally aired in Southern California on UPN as early as 4 in the morning. And yes, this was on weekdays when most kids should be sleeping at that time. So as you can imagine, since both shows aired at a time when most people are asleep, they both only lasted a couple of seasons before being canceled. It did, however, manage to get 7 VHS home video releases from Vidmark, marking the series' first release on home video in America. Fast forward to 2001, where Dragon Ball Z found a new home on Cartoon Network's Toonami programming block starting in 1998. There, the show became hugely popular, quickly becoming the headlining series for the programming block for many years. After the final episode of Dragon Ball Z aired on Toonami, it was announced that Funimation acquired the original Dragon Ball and that it would air alongside reruns of Dragon Ball Z on Cartoon Network. Finally, after over a decade of trying to bring the original Dragon Ball anime to the United States, we finally got to see the original adventures of Goku, and it was mostly underwhelming. Keep in mind that for most of us in the United States, Dragon Ball Z came out first before the original Dragon Ball did. So a lot of us, including myself, were not ready for the tonal shift. Dragon Ball Z is famous as being much darker and grittier than the original Dragon Ball anime, so that was what we were used to. For a vast majority of the story, the original Dragon Ball anime was just a campy and silly kung fu action adventure. The original Dragon Ball anime did fairly well during its run on Cartoon Network, just not as well as Dragon Ball Z did. It was only during the King Piccolo saga does this begin to change. This was when the show begins its transition into the formula we came to know in Dragon Ball Z. The arc starts with a bang and remains sky-high in tension from beginning to end and gives us hints of what we will eventually see in Dragon Ball Z. For the first time, Goku faces off against a legitimate threat as opposed to past villains in the series, which were more or less joke villains. From here on, the series would take on an increasingly serious tone, and Goku would be forced to fight against increasingly more powerful opponents. Let's not forget to mention that King Piccolo was also the first major villain in the series to affect Goku on a personal level. And he certainly will not be the last. This also includes the introduction to King Piccolo's son, the Piccolo we all know from Dragon Ball Z, who would become Gohan's mentor and an invaluable ally of Goku in that show. Another highlight of the original anime was the Red Ribbon Army saga, in which a lot of story elements are revisited in Dragon Ball Z during the Cell saga. Because of this, a lot of what happens later in Dragon Ball Z makes this arc particularly important in fully understanding what the Red Ribbon Army is, Goku's past relationship with them in regards to androids 17 and 18, and what made Cell the predominant antagonist during his namesake saga. The story at this point in Dragon Ball starts to get interesting, but it doesn't go into the more epic battles that Dragon Ball Z is famous for until the last couple of sagas. So while it is a lot more lighthearted than its sequel, what happens here is just as important when it comes to understanding later stories. Aside from the considerable difference in tone from Dragon Ball Z, it's kind of repetitive and overly simplistic at times. That is because every other saga in this anime revolves around a kung fu tournament of some sort, often with very little stakes involved. I'm not kidding here. Half of the major sagas in this anime take place during exhibition-style events and tournaments. Other instances include focusing on jokes and gags for far too long. Single fights take multiple episodes to showcase, which gets worse in Dragon Ball Z. Still, when Dragon Ball decides to be funny, it gets hilariously funny and manages to entertain with a decent blend of comedy and fantastic battles. The humor throughout Dragon Ball is far more balanced with the action, unlike Dragon Ball Z, which often takes itself a bit too seriously for such a silly story and characters. Still, Dragon Ball is gut-bustingly hilarious at times, although it might surprise some people how sexual the jokes can get and how comfortable Goku is running around naked. Another advantage that Dragon Ball has over its far more famous sequel is that prior to Dragon Ball Kai, Dragon Ball had a lot less filler. There is some bad filler in here to be sure, but the total amount is far less than the original run of Dragon Ball Z, where it takes 20 episodes to showcase a single fight. Let's not forget that this is a universe in which 5 minutes easily turns into 5 hours. So while it lacks the urgency and intensity of its sequels, it provides an entirely different kind of fun. If for some unexplainable reason you have yet to watch the Dragon Ball franchise, this is the perfect place to start. Although if you were like me and watched Dragon Ball Z before going into this, it does take a while to transition into the formula that we are used to from Dragon Ball Z. So it requires a good amount of patience. It will pay off eventually, as a lot of story elements from Dragon Ball Z will make a lot more sense, as that series is only the latter half of a much larger narrative. So with that, I will give story a 4 out of 5. The opening theme for Dragon Ball is Makafushigi Adventure by Hiroki Takahashi, and the ending theme is Romantic Ageruyo by Ushio Hashimoto. The soundtrack itself was composed by Shunsuke Kikuchi. Your enjoyment of the English language version of the show varies, as there are multiple English dubs to choose. I would personally choose the in-house dub from Funimation, since not only is it the most common English dub of Dragon Ball, but it is the only one that I know of to be dubbed to completion. The downside is that the US version of Dragon Ball that was aired on Cartoon Network had many edits done to it. Most of the edits were digital cosmetic changes which were done to remove nudity and blood and dialogue edits. I don't like it either, but these edits were necessary in order to have the show aired on American TV. The DVDs and Blu-rays do not contain these edits, thankfully. But Funimation also has a habit of sometimes altering the dialogue in an attempt to make a scene more humorous rather than sticking to an accurate translation. And other times, well, I think you know my opinions on that. But the real treasure to be had here is the original Japanese performances. The most iconic is Masako Nozawa, who voiced Goku in the original Dragon Ball and still voices him to this day after 38 years. And when it comes to the Japanese voice of Goku, I cannot see anyone else who can play the character as well as she does.
Hop, met, hop, met, ha!
Seriously, not bad for an 87-year-old woman. Look at that little old lady go. So it mostly comes down to personal taste. If you like it in its most authentic format, go with the original Japanese dub. But if you don't like reading subtitles, go with the Funimation English dub. And if you want some really weird, obscure laughs, go with the Vidmark VHS. Just be prepared to pay a pretty pricey penny. And with that, I give soundtrack a 4 out of 5. The animation was done by Toei Animation, who continues to animate for various Dragon Ball related media as well as the sequels. The art and animation is not exactly gold standard today, but it was acceptable considering this was the 1980s and this is a 40-year-old show. It's very much a product of its times, but one does get used to it rather quickly. To say it is simple is an understatement. They do recycle a lot of animation like in chase sequences, but overall it's well done animation that has surprisingly aged well. Sometimes it can be a bit crude, which means that it obviously pales in comparison to modern standards, and the presentation is shown in a now outdated display resolution. Character designs are also exaggerated for comedic slapstick purposes and is much brighter and more colorful than the animation of Dragon Ball Z. On the other hand, the fights are better planned out, particularly during the Tenkaichi Budokai, where the action focuses more on the martial arts rather than combatants throwing energy blasts and fireballs at each other. The animation may not be as impressive nowadays, but it's still decent for its time. So I will give animation a 4 out of 5. Goku never changes. No matter how powerful he becomes throughout the years, he still sports that childish, mischievous, and naive demeanor. Still, you'll realize he isn't just some stupid and strong fighter. He still sports that strong sense of justice that was imprinted on him by his adopted grandfather. Goku in particular is very fun to watch. Because the majority of Dragon Ball viewers in America saw Z first, it left us wanting to see what Goku was like during his early years. He still sports a happy-go-lucky, optimistic, and overly friendly personality, even towards his enemies, which I've got to agree with Vegeta, sometimes this does more harm than good. The other characters are funny and original and have all kinds of quirks and flaws that will make you laugh. On the other side, in Dragon Ball Z, only a few characters from the original Dragon Ball actually mattered, and the rest of the earlier cast were pretty much worthless or downgraded to cameos, Yamcha in particular. In Dragon Ball, the characters are far more balanced, and the human characters actually manage to help out a lot in battle more often. I also like the use of more comedic villains. While interesting in their own way, I still found myself counting the episodes before the anime begins to transition to a more serious tone. These are not the world-ending threats like Frieza, Cell, and Majin Buu. Eventually, character dynamics begin to act more in line with their characteristics from Dragon Ball Z. The characters will take on more serious development as they face greater challenges, but it takes a while for many of these characters to make that change. Thus, I will give characters a 3 out of 5. Dragon Ball is exactly what it is. It is the beginning of Goku's adventures from childhood into adulthood. It's a real shame that this series gets such a bad reputation because of its successors. However, it provides a decent establishment and setup for many of the conventions that made its sequel so popular, despite being much more lighthearted and simplistic. It also provides a decent lead-up to one of my all-time favorite anime shows that got me into the wider world of Japanese animation. While it is not as epic, it's as entertaining as its more widely known sequels, just in a different way. For those trying to get into the Dragon Ball franchise, this is the perfect place to start. It's the first chapter in a much more grand adventure. So with that said, I give the original Dragon Ball 3 points for interest and an overall rating of 7 out of 10. Well, with that being said, I think it's about time we move on from the original anime series and go Super Saiyan. Stay tuned as we take a look at every single major highlight of the Dragon Ball franchise throughout the year, as the Year of the Dragon Ball is officially underway. Until next time, this is the American Anime Otaku, signing out.